Miniature Realms is proudly sponsored by Income Gaming, Cheltenham's premier friendly local game store. Check the link in the description. With AOS 4 on the horizon, and at the time of releasing this, we've just had the full box revealed with all of the Skaven goodness in it, and some Stormcasts as well, if you like those kinds of things. I don't think they look too bad this time around. But as someone who's primarily interested in square-based gaming and the old world at the moment, I really wanted to get back and do some painting tutorials based around Skaven, and these new releases look like the time to do it. Regular viewers of the channel will now have quite a few old world projects at the moment, and none of those are stopping, but I have some need for some Skaven for another project this summer, and I thought this release was the perfect timing to return to some Skaven tutorials. Now obviously none of those new models are out as yet, but I have this nice sealed set of Plague Monks here, along with quite a few other things for this project, so I thought it was about time that I snipped one out and did a painting tutorial for something other than that Skaven clan rat, which I did many months ago before the release of the old world. I'll pop a little link in now for those of you who'd like to watch that. But my name's Stuart, welcome to Miniature Realms, and in this video I'm going to show you how I paint a Plague Monk. So there he is, clipped off, cleaned up and stuck on a base. I've gone for a bit of a town theme for some of these, and again that relates to a project that's coming up over the summer, and I've primed the miniature black and I'm providing an underpainting method using a Zenithal highlight with the airbrush white down, mostly on the top, though I do go a little bit in from the sides and underneath to turn it more grayscale rather than pure black underneath. So I'll base coat in glazes made up of contrast style paints, mostly Citadel contrast, and if it's pure black you don't get any coverage at all. So what you really want is that sort of light to dark transition which really aids your painting later on. And then just to make some of those top highlights really pop, I like to do a white dry brush over the top as well, a la slap chop so to speak, but if you add it to a standard Zenithal as well, you get a really nice mix between the two. So the main body of the miniature here is covered by the robes, and I'm going to use some contrast gut ripper flesh and some contrast medium here. I'm going to aim to get this first stage done, which is 80% of the colour of the miniature with one single colour. So it's about a 50-50 mix here. I want to provide quite a thin glaze of this gut ripper flesh so that the underpainting shows through and really gives me an outline for my highlights and will really help me have a nice smoothish finish to it without having to do loads and loads of layers of painting. The reason I use this method is because not only do I find base coating in this way much more enjoyable than sort of a standard mid-tone and then add in the shade and then highlight afterwards, I also find that you get a really nice multi-layered effect, and it's just a lot easier to do. You can also leave the miniature just at these base layers as well, so I know many people follow my tutorials completely, many just take little tips and different parts of them, and some people don't really like to highlight or go to those sort of more advanced levels that will be on later on in the tutorial, and using a contrast paint over an underpainted miniature like this shows someone who wants to get a quick tabletop army on the gaming table ready to go how you could go about it as well. So staying with the gut ripper flesh, we're adding some 2 thin coats range Trooper white now. This paint has got a slightly warmish tone to it. It's not pure kind of bright white. There's an element of cream in there, and at least it has to my eyes anyway. So I'm just blending the two together about 50-50. I didn't really need to add much water because the contrast paint thins it nicely. And what I'm doing here now is going back to those most raised areas where the white is showing through the most, where the contrast mix we did hasn't pulled, and just enhancing that slowly. I'm keeping the paint quite thin here. I don't want too stark a highlight, and I'll just build up with layers, and we're back to much more traditional style painting here. Thin layers of paints building up on those highlighted areas. Working my way around, focusing on those folds of material where they are the highest, leaving the contrast mix in the recesses as much as possible to act as the shadow. And as I keep banging on about it, that underpainting method with that dry brush has given you the outline to follow here. So I really am starting from those highest points and blending my way down. Now it's just Trooper White on its own. I have thinned this on the palette again to a fairly thin consistency, probably 50-50 with water at least. I don't always exactly measure it. I know a lot of people will talk about to the consistency of milk and all of those kind of things, and absolutely sometimes that is the consistency you want. But what you really want to do is get the paint at the consistency that does the job for you in hand at the time. And the job here is to be able to add some finer edge highlights there, right in the most raised points on the miniature, but not to have it so thick that you get a chalky line, so it's smooth, but also not so thin that it just runs all over the miniature. So sometimes it just takes a little bit of trial and error, and that's the same for all painters, more experience and less. So you just add a bit of water, see how it is on your palette, add a bit to the miniature. If you find it's a bit too thin, maybe add a little bit more paint. It's probably easier to go less water to start with and thin it till you get it to that right amount. And if it's been on the palette for a while, it may start to dry, so you may need to add a little bit more water, or in a case of a wet palette, sometimes more of that water soaks through. So don't be frightened to play around with it and adjust it. There's no set right way of doing things ever. It's just the way that best suits the job for you. Much like before, working my way around, making sure I'm leaving all the previous layers showing as well. That's really important when you're doing this kind of layering style of highlighting. If you go too thick, you're just going to obliterate all the work you've done already, which is wasting your time, but also taking away all the good work and losing that transition. Miniature Realms is proudly sponsored by Baron of Dice, premium wargaming dice. Over 500 styles, over 4,000 customer reviews. Welcome to the best dice on the planet. This is Vallejo Express Colour Dwarf Skin, and for those of you who aren't aware, Express Colour is their own range of contrast style paints, and this is my favourite at the moment for doing skin. It's very, very versatile, and I'm using it in most of my projects, and if you're a regular viewer, you'll be well aware of that, and probably heard me say this many times before as well. But I always like to assume there may be some new viewers each time, especially when there's a new project on the go. Something like Skaven might attract people to the channel for the first time. So it goes over really, really nicely. It goes into the recesses really well and doesn't pull as much as some of the other contrast style fleshes out there, which is exactly what I want for this miniature. And where it's at its lightest is where the white is at its strongest on this underpainted miniature, and that works well. If I wanted a darker skin or a more tan skin, I might want something that's a little bit higher in pigment, but this is just perfect for what I need for that slightly pink skin, but that deep reddish in all the recesses. This is Contrast Iandan Yellow. It's quite a bright yellow, and I'm using it here on the boils. Now we're going to be using yellow on the teeth as well, so I wanted something a little bit brighter for the boils so they stand out a bit more than the teeth and the nails and things. And for those teeth and nails and things, we have Nazdrag Yellow again, which is a slightly darker, more ochre colour. Not a massive difference right now, but as a base to work from, which of course we're going to highlight from, they will look better at the end by starting with these two different yellows. If you did only have one, you could use one for both things. Now a little touch of contrast Wildwood for the tiny bit of the handle of his blade here that's showing. Not much at all in it, it goes on pretty quick. I'm also using it for this beautiful rope belt that he's got going on here, all the bling for this Plague Monk. Now for some contrast Cygor Brown, and we've got just the tiniest amount of rat fur showing. Most of it's hidden under these robes. There's a little bit on the elbow here. Some of the miniatures and sculpts you'll have a lot more showing, but most of them it's very much just bits of pink skin sticking out of folds of cloth. So I'm just adding this in just for the little bit of fur that's there. This is Scale Colour Decayed Metal, again one of my go-to colours, and it's a really nice way of adding some tone and colour underneath your metallics, making them look less shiny unless you really want them to. And for an old blade like this, which is going to be a little bit rusty, it's probably even more important than it would be on some of the other paint jobs I do. For the next layer we have Black Metal, which again is a regular that I use all the time, and the actual metallics that I'm using in this tutorial are the same. But again, leaving a little bit more of that brown showing through than I might do normally because I want this blade to look old and dirty. And for that final highlight, back to the trusty Game Air Silver, and I'm just adding a little bit of highlight towards the end of the blade here and on the very, very top edges. It just adds a bit of a nice transition. We're going to dirty all this down later on. Now back to contrast, gut, ripper, flesh, and we've reached the stage of the miniature when all of the base coats are down. At least some of the layers we have done multiple layers, so the metallics we've already done, and of course we already did multiple layers on this cloak here and all these cloth areas of the miniature, and they look like they were finished, and they absolutely could be. But I've just decided while painting that I wanted to reinforce some of the darker areas and blend out some of the highlights a little bit, and I think it's really good to show it at this point of the tutorial. I could have gone back and edited it so it looked like I did it as the next stage, but it's as you paint a miniature and add more colours on there sometimes that you think, no, I want to balance this out a little bit, and that's why I think it's important to put it in the times that it actually happened during the paint job. And you'd notice anyway, because you'd see the other bits of the miniature. I've already got some paint on them. But what I'm doing here is adding very, very thin layers of the paint and then going back to my water pot and adding a bit of moisture onto the bristles, the tiniest bit, and just blending it out. And just adding very, very thin layers here to smooth out and tone down some of the highlights, but mostly reinforcing the darker areas. And it just really, really increases the smoothness between the light and the dark. And it's only a tabletop miniature, a good standard tabletop miniature, but this isn't a competition piece, but I still wanted to refine it just a little bit, and that's what I'm doing here. So returning to some two thin coats, and this is Skulker Yellow. This is nice, bright, vibrant yellow, and I'm using it as the next stage highlight on all of the sort of bone and teeth areas. So we have these spikes that are protruding from the back of the Skaven as part of a mutation, no doubt, and they also have the teeth and the nails as well. For that bonish colour, I've decided to go with a dark sand. This is from Model Colour. There's plenty of colours in multiple ranges like this. You're looking for that kind of creamy whitish colour rather than the bright white colour. And then this is perfect for it. I'm just adding a little highlight towards the end of the nails and the end of the teeth, making sure that both of those previous stages of yellow are still showing through. So this is Deep Purple, also from that Vallejo Express colour range, and I use it all the time along with Dwarf Skin as part of my skin recipe. I'm not using the third part of that I very often do in many of my tutorials, so the regular viewers will notice that, but I'm focusing here around the boils and the pussy areas and in between the fingernails. It just adds a little bit more redness to it and vibrancy, and really kind of adds another layer to it. I'm really trying hard not to get it on any of the flat areas, so I'm really focusing around the edge of the sort of the hooded cowl here and underneath the nose, making sure that the top highlight area of that skin, so to speak, remains the same colour. So it's just adding that greater depth. And then two thin coats again, and this is Dwarven Skin and Elven Skin with the mid and top highlight of that particular triad, starting with the mid-tone first, just going back and reinforcing the highlights on the skin. And this matches very, very closely to the highest areas of the skin from the dwarf skin over that underpainted miniature. So if you're going over the pure whitest areas of that underpainted miniature, and it matches pretty closely, so it's a good way of reinforcing it, filling it out, making it look less washed out and grainy. And then as we move on to those final highlights, we're just using the elven skin, and then here we're talking about much smaller highlights, so thin lines on the tail, on the knuckles of the fingers, on the bridge of the nose, that kind of thing, and you end up with that nice layered highlighted effect. This is Citadel Colour Layer Phalanx Yellow, and it's the brightest yellow I think I have in my mix without adding some white to it. So I'm just using it here to pick out the very tops of all those pussy spots and boils. Here's some Oilworks grease, again another regular appearance on the channel. I'm using this instead of an Agrax Earthshade wash or non-oil or something like that. It's a nice kind of brownish sepia tone. I'm just applying it to the metallic areas, making sure that I allow it to concentrate and pool in the recesses, but just kind of painting it on the sort of more highlighted flat areas of the blade. You can absolutely use Agrax Earthshade for this, especially if you're being careful. I've just used a lot of oil paints because you can play around with them and adjust them more afterwards. With Artist White Spirit you can wipe them back off again, something you can't do with a dried standard wash. They also dry super matte, and then in the recesses it almost looks like dirt and dust deposits as well, so you get that extra effect, which again is absolutely brilliant for a dirty Skaven like this. Now this is Dirty Downs Rust, and a water soluble paint, and that's quite important. I don't often mention when I've used this before on tutorials. Really good stuff this, and it's really versatile. There's lots of ways to do it, and I'm not going to show in this video a million ways to use it. But what I'm doing first is just kind of dappling it on into little areas. Then I dampen my brush and blend it out a little bit, so you've got a slightly lighter finish to it. I'm then returning once that is surface dry and then dappling more on again. So what you do get there is a bit of a multi-layer, so you get the slightly lighter rusty colour underneath from that first layer, and then the more concentrated dense look for these smaller dots. It just makes your rust look a little bit more realistic. I won't go into detail with the basing. I've added a little bit of earth texture to the edges of these miniatures because these are going to be part of a Skaven army, but then also used for a Warhammer quest project that I'm starting to work on as well, hence the mixture of stone bases and a bit of earth at the side as well, so they'll look good on both areas. They'll also look really good for Mordheim, and I'm sure they'll find their way into my Mordheim games as well. Just adding a little bit of mud effect to the base here, and then also to the bottom of the monk's cowl, the monk's cloth, and then also adding the same tufts that I'm using on my more sort of field-based miniatures, but just adding them as if they're growing up between the cracks in the paving here as well. Another way of tying them in, but they don't look out of place either. Now these are 2mm tufts from Warpaint Figures in the UK. I'm a big fan of them, and I've really got into using the shorter tufts. They don't dominate the base quite as much. And now blood for the blood god. And I'm getting used to using this new formula now. I had the old formula for years and the pots just last forever as well. So when I tried this new formula, this has also probably been out for years. It took me a little while to get used to it. It's still not quite as good, but it's good fun. So I've got it on a palette just out of shot. I've got a undiluted blob, and I've also got a slightly diluted blob as well. So the diluted blob I'm using to sort of paint around the edges of those boils to make them look a little bit more wet and gross and yucky. And you'll notice I put a little bit around the edges of the Skaven's mouth as well. You know, he's diseased, maybe his teeth and gums are bleeding. You can be gross with Warhammer and it's all good fun. And then for the blade, I'm using the undiluted amount at the start, and a bit like I did with the Dirty Down Rust, I'm kind of dappling it on, and then I'll go back with a slightly damp brush and just sort of blend it out a little bit. What you don't want is just one big thick blood like a 5-year-old's come along and did it. You want it to make it look gruesome, but also a little bit realistic, and I think a little bit less is more is the way to go with these things. Even though I love to put blood effect on my miniatures, my Warhammer miniatures, I do try to go a little bit less is more, because it does look a little bit more classy. And then we are pretty much done here, so time to add the black rim to your bases. Choose your own colours, of course. And we have our finished Skaven Plague Monk, and I'm pretty happy with the methods that I've used for that. It's a nice striking tabletop miniature, and I think it'll look really good as a unit. I've already started working on the rest of the unit, but I don't think it's too taxing either to use as rank and file. The methods are fairly quick. But let me know what you think in the comments below about the paint job. Do you like the method it's using? Any parts you're going to carry over to your own miniatures yourself? But also let me know what you think of the Skaven 4th edition release for the AOS game. I know some of you will be playing Age of Sigmar. I'm always tempted by it, but the old world is definitely keeping me very busy at the moment. I will definitely be picking up the Skaven half at least of the new AOS set and using as much as I can in my own Skaven army, which is going to be one of my projects this year. I'm going to do a lot of it over the summer, along with other things. The dwarves are not going anywhere. I'm working on those at the moment. I've nearly finished my first 2,000 points, but the Skaven will be appearing in my content this summer, partly because of the Age of Sigmar release, and those miniatures are fun and I want to paint them, but also because I wanted to work on a legacy army as well. I've been focusing on all of the main 9 factions for the old world, and I thought there would be a perfect time to work on a legacy army and do some tutorials and videos around that at the same time as they've got their day in the sun in a different game. But we can cross over. For lovers of the old world, we can definitely use those miniatures for the old world, and I intend to do so. And then tying in with that, and I keep hinting about it, there's a project ongoing in the background, and there'll be videos for that as well to do with Warhammer Quest and some of my favourite characters in Warhammer. But thank you very much for watching the video. If you have enjoyed it, please do give us a like. It really helps the video get seen by other people. Join the Discord. It's a nice friendly place to go and chat about anything wargaming. And if you'd like to support the channel further, subscribe or join the Patreon. It's a really good way of helping me continue to do these videos. I really love doing them. big thank you to all my existing subscribers and patrons. Your support really keeps me going. Really appreciate it. But thank you very much for watching. Take care, and I'll catch you soon. I don't like it, Godric. Something just doesn't feel right. I can smell the Skaven's hand in this muddling.